So we have Diane and Lisa, of course, and Anne, two Annes, and looks like Miriam, and Gail and Jim, Joanna, Katie, Leanne.
Nadine.
Oh, here's Katie Fenton, yeah, and Margaret, who I don't know. Welcome, Margaret. Marius, Nadine, Rebecca, Sunny, Susan, Trudy, and Darby Dye on her iPhone. So more people may join in, but I can mute them. So if we have a sound problem, I'll try to control that. So the suggestion is to stay on mute unless you have a burning question. Lisa said it's fine to ask a question during her sharing. So feel free. And then we'll have time at the end, of course. Okie doke. All right.
And Matt, I might jump off at some point while you're talking just very briefly, because at Travis Air Force Base, they're preparing to let everyone off on Monday morning. So there's a presentation going on now. Great, so I will get started. My thought is I would just give you a background of the virology, the epidemiology, how this whole crazy thing got started. And forgive me if you know a lot of this already, we'll move through it. I can talk about testing, I can talk about the antiviral drug that shows the most promise. I can talk about the natural history of the disease, which is really, really interesting. And then the importance of social distancing and why that really matters. Matt would also, and this is a huge part of the conversation, of commitment to social distancing really relies on trusting each other and helping each other. And this is only going to work as a big social experiment if we all stick to this and are successful. So to the extent we can prop each other up and help each other out and get through this, there'll be more of us alive at the end of it, frankly. So that's the strategy here. So I'll start a little bit from the beginning. So sometime in early mid-December, there's a virus that normally lives happily in bats, jumped into humans. And we don't know why. It apparently went indirectly through another animal. What animal was that? And we don't know yet. There have been theories, but nothing proven yet. What made it jump? We don't know whether it mutated or whether this was simply a virus that had been in bats that we were exposed to for the first time in human history. Something like 1,300 species of bats and many 7 or 8 known species of coronaviruses, more of which we're discovering all the time. So all bets are off as to exactly how this happened. What's really interesting, there's been genetic analysis and it shows it only happened once. They go back and like retrace the steps of the history of this virus. You can tell genetically there's just one jump from presumably one bat to one intermediate animal at a seafood market. And from there, it infected people. Within a week, there were 20 or 30 people sick. And as you know now, it's a pandemic. It's all over the globe. Our numbers for Santa Clara County last night, they're being updated at 5 o'clock. We're about 200 people here in Santa Clara County. And what's really interesting, I talked to Sarah Cody, our health officer, yesterday. It's very scattered. You know, there aren't that many known clusters. There are a few, but not a lot. And she said the wake-up call for her was when she, at that first case of community, was someone who had no other risk factors. They hadn't been to China. And there was really nothing to signify that they were at all at risk, yet they got sick, which for her was a huge red flag. And she suddenly realized that this could be out in the community and it was something we need to get a handle on. She said the second wake-up call for her were those TSA cases you probably heard about at San Jose Airport. Why was that a wake-up call? For 3 cases, none of them knew each other. None of them worked together, completely independent. So what that told her is that it was prevalent enough in the general community among people who are at huge risk because they're seeing new travelers every single day, that it was out there. And that explains in part, and we can talk about this later, as to why Santa Clara County has been so aggressive with this. And frankly, it's something to be really proud of. Other counties have followed suit, state followed suit. I think we're going to see other states follow. So we're really being watched as a model here, and to the extent we succeed or fail, we'll say a lot as to really how we're remembered in medical history. Talk a little bit about virus. It's called a coronavirus because if you look at it under electron microscope, it's got this beautiful ring. It's just extraordinarily beautiful. Very small. All it is RNA. It's a strand of RNA. It's like 20 to 30 kilobases. Can't even reproduce itself. It's like there's no there, but it's devastating. How infectious is it? They're saying the current studies show that for every one person exposed and infected, it's transmitted to 2.5 other people. That's high. That's high. And that's, again, what really worries the health department. The goal with social distancing is to bring it down below 1, because for everyone who's infected transmits it to less than one person. That's the end of the epidemic. That's the end of the outbreak. And we can all go home and stop worrying about it. 0.5 is something to be worried about. How fatal is it? The initial studies out of China, it was 2% fatality rate. We think that's probably exaggerated. It's probably less than that, simply because all we know is the tip of the iceberg. We don't know the bottom. And there are a lot of people who get through this absolutely fine with no major illness at all. And we can talk about that as well. Matt, is that noise in the background annoying to you, the phone I have going? Okay, I'm sorry. 2% is higher than seasonal flu. I think it's fairly comparable to the 1918 pandemic. It's really not a fair comparison because back then we didn't have ventilators and respirators and ICU. Talk a little bit about its natural history. So the incubation period, which is the time between exposure and infection to when you develop symptoms, is between 2 to 14 days. And the latest study shows that on average, 5.1 days before you start to show symptoms. Again, it can range during this whole period. So that's why when you hear about people at Travis and elsewhere, Miramar and Dobbins and Lackland being quarantined for 14 days, that's why. They want to make sure that if they have been exposed, even if they're not showing symptoms and the tests are not necessarily completely reliable, they know that by 14 days they will have cleared the virus. So that's a really important number. The symptoms, again, we talk onset is about 5 days, starts with fatigue, fever, and then a day or two later, dry cough and other upper respiratory symptoms. For a lot of people, it kind of ends there. It's short-lived, no big deal. And we think something like 83% of people really will not ever progress to moderate symptoms, moderate to severe symptoms. In 10%, 10 to 15% of people, moderate, and then in anywhere between 2 to 5%, very severe, like catastrophically severe. Those are the folks we're worried about. So who are those people? They tend to be people over the age of 65. They tend to be people with pre-existing medical conditions like diabetes, obstructive pulmonary disease, cardiac disease, other underlying issues, immune disorders. We're a little worried about folks in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. We're worried about healthcare workers because even if they're young and healthy, if they're exposed to a very high titer of the virus, they're getting sick, which is why we're seeing some of these really lovely young people get sick. That's a worry. Again, symptoms start mild, then they get severe, or they turn their course. The other sort of data point that I think has alarmed Dr. Cody and a lot of other people who are leading this effort is it's very clear there are people who can carry and transmit the virus but never show symptoms. They're completely asymptomatic. And again, these tend to be young people. So the fear is that as long as it was business as usual and people going to clubs and gyms and yoga studios and all that, that they would be the carriers in a outbreak, an epidemic that we could never really get our hands around. And meanwhile, they're constantly or frequently transmitting it to elders and people at risk and killing people. So that's the reasoning behind all of this as well. A couple more final points. Because this is new, our immune system has never seen it. We have no natural antibodies. Our traditional playbook doesn't work. We really can't apply any of the tools in our tool shed that we have for all of these other viral diseases that we have, like cold and flu and all of that. There are no antivirals at this point. There's nothing. If you're sick, all they do is provide support, symptomatic relief. And there's no vaccine, of course. So You hear all these analogies like, what about the flu? What about the flu? What about the flu? I call it what about itis? I get really tired of it because we do have tools with the flu. We do have vaccines. They're not perfect, but we have that. We also have great, some of the other viral diseases, we have really great antiviral therapies, as we've seen with HIV, which has been profound how it's turned that epidemic around. And we don't yet know what our own protective antibodies are. There are a lot of smart people studying it right now. And in other words, if you're exposed to the virus, what sort of immune defense does your immune system deploy? And what can we learn from that? Are these antibodies that then we could take from infected people who recovered and then offer them to other people? Can we help guide a vaccine, of course, because what you're trying to do is build up these antibodies. So that's a really, really hot area of research. People are working, Stanford said, 24/7 right now to try and figure out what are these protective antibodies. So all we really have is social distancing. You know, that's literally all we have. So to sort of underscore a point I made early on, to the extent we do successfully socially distance and do stick with this, we will turn this thing around. And you know, the graveyards will be emptier at the end of this, and that's what we're aiming for. We've seen it work in China, we've seen it work in Taiwan, we've seen it work in Singapore. The amazing news out of Wuhan this week was that they had one new case. This is the epicenter. This is where, you know, it was catastrophic. They have one new case. So we can look at what they've successfully done and replicate it to the extent we can. And it does prove that it can be done. Those of you who are historians will remember with the 1918 flu, St. Louis implemented really aggressive measures early on. Philadelphia did not. Philadelphia had really high fatality rate and St. Louis did not. So these are all things, history lessons we can look to and learn from. What else to talk about? And then we'd love to open it up and talk to Matt and hear your questions. With respect to testing, we would all love to be tested, particularly if we feel symptomatic. The bad news is right now, because of the shortage of tests, and we can talk about why that is, there still is not the testing we need. So if you call your practitioner and ask about a test, we'll want to know what your symptoms are. What the health department and other networks like Kaiser are saying, Sutter, Kaiser, McFall, all those, if your symptoms are mild to moderate, go home, self-isolate, stay home, and recover. If you've got support there, that's really the best place for you to be. They don't want you in emergency rooms, good place to be. They don't want you, you know, at an urgent care center. If your symptoms are urgent, are severe, really severe upper respiratory problems, shortness of breath, out of control fever, or if you fall into one of these really extreme high risk groups, they will test you. It's takes paperwork, depending on who your provider is, but you can get a test. There was news this morning out of Los Angeles that they're basically saying, don't come to us for a test unless you're ready to be hospitalized. We just don't have the tests. And you've probably also heard they have shortages of masks, they have shortages of gowns, they have shortages of goggles, they have shortages of gloves. The big concern is if we burn through all these supplies now, we won't have them when our caseload really starts peaking and climbing. Great grand rounds at Stanford I was able to privy to, where the doctor had, you know, the head of ER and the head of ICU and all that were talking. They currently have 83 ICU beds at Stanford. They're prepared to ramp up to about 190 if they need to. I mean, that's what they have on tap. They can, within a couple days to 2 weeks, they can mobilize all these ICU beds. They're looking for extra ventilators now, respirators, you know, for breathing support. We're privileged to be in an area that has that ability to scale up if need be. In a perfect world, all this will work and all of that, none of that will be needed. And I guess, you know, my final thought is, if we get through this and successfully and do just fine, there'll be people that will say, oh, we overreacted, you know, what was the big deal? And that's not the right not the right answer. To me, what that says is we succeeded. We succeeded through commitment and discipline and caring for each other in turning this thing around. And if we never have to use those 200 ICUs, what a wonderful story that is. So, boy, some nice questions here.
Lisa?
Yes.
Everyone may not know that they could chat a question. So down at the,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I'll just tell them, if you run your cursor on the screen, you'll see down below there's a chat box.
Great.
And when you click on that, box will appear. Sometimes it appears in the middle. You can move it to the side if you play with it, but
Matt, I'm going to step aside for just a second to
okay.
deal with this other, move the phone out of the way because it's distracting. I'll be right back.
Okay. So the chat box will appear in the middle of your screen, and if there is a way to move it, if you hit the 3 dots, or I forget how I did it, but you can move it to the right or to the left of your screen. And then you type at the bottom of the box, either way, type a question, and you need to, push return to send the question. And then Lisa will see the questions appear. So you can play around with that while we're waiting for Lisa to come back. And we are recording this, so.
I'm back.
Okay, good. All right, so you have a few questions there.
Yeah. Can people get COVID-19 a second time? No one knows. There are, as you probably know, it's a family of coronaviruses. So SARS was one of them, MERS is another one, and then the common cold is like four of the others. The data coming out on SARS and MERS is that the antibodies do protect you, at least for 3 or 4 years, and certainly with the common cold, they do not. As you know, we all get these things over and over. So we don't yet know. Great question from Leanne. What's being done to help medical personnel with the shortage of protective equipment, masks, gowns, etc.? There are places you can donate. I know the Santa Clara Valley Medical Foundation is taking, and I can actually share these resources with you because I have them someplace. The foundation that supports the big public hospital down in San Jose is frankly really in a world of hurt. They've got enough now on a day-to-day basis. Will they have enough in 2 weeks? Really unclear. So the Silicon Valley Leadership Council has organized, and a lot of the big tech companies now are donating what they have. PG&E yesterday donated lots of masks. All we can figure is that they had these masks for firefighters and the people out working the wires. But that's a great, Leanne, great point. Let's put together a list of places where you can donate. The problem with respect to the called PPE, the protective equipment, is that something like 70 to 80% of it comes out of China, in the Hubei province specifically. Manufacturing shut down. They like zero supplies coming out of that part of China. So it's not the distributor's fault, it's not the supplier's fault, it's not anybody's fault. There's a huge run on supplies, particularly in China, South Korea, and elsewhere. And we had a run on supplies. I talked to a department yesterday who said they've run through 3 years worth of inventory in 3 months. And all we have in the county is, 200 cases. It's not that much. Problem, of course, as you know, anyone chime in if you're a nurse, is that every time you go in and work with a patient, you've got a fresh mask, either the N95 or a surgical mask. And then you take it off, and the next time you go in to offer a meal or give a shot or change a diaper or whatever, you need a new mask. So you can run through 15 masks minimum every day on for a patient. So they burn through the numbers really quickly. And there's a unit, I talked to a nurse on background this week at Good Samaritan Hospital, and she's saying they're being asked to, they've taken their whole oncology ward at Good Sam and turned it into a COVID ward, just to give you a sense of what's going on. And the nurse, it was emotional to talk to her. The nurses there were being asked to reuse their masks, put their masks in little plastic Ziploc bags, their name on it, put it aside, and then put it back on every time they went back in that room. You know, every time you handle a mask, it's putting our healthcare workers at unnecessary risk. So good news is that China's recovering and manufacturing will start back up. There's a huge backlog. We've been told there's like a 3-week backlog for some of these supplies. To be honest with you, the folks who are being hit the hardest right now are those without real deep inventories and the deep pockets. So it's not Stanford. Stanford University has put all of its supplies behind lock and key, I was told. And they're good for now, as long as they pay attention. Skilled nursing facilities, these boarding care homes, and the facility like up in San Mateo County that has a case, they have nothing, and hopefully they do now. But plus, frankly, I don't know how well educated they were in protecting themselves and their patients. So when you see these clusters and these outbreaks of disease, like the one up in Washington and one in San Mateo, that's why. And my hope is regionally we identify where these really vulnerable populations are in the places that are not Stanford and they're not UCSF and they're not Valley Med. Anyway, it'd be good to gather a list of how we can help. Let me scroll up here, some of these questions. I don't know how many of you have been watching Gavin Newsom's press briefings. I find them so inspiring. He's quite a remarkable governor, and I think we're privileged to have him. But he said he was down in LA a week ago, and people were buying swim goggles to protect their eyes. They were, one of the hospitals has gone to the garment district in LA and was having gowns sewn. When should someone self-quarantine? First time you feel symptoms. First time you feel symptoms. So as soon as you spike a fever, any respiratory illnesses at all. And what the health department is saying is if you can stay in your own room with your family, that's great. Use your own bathroom if you can. Don't use the common bathroom. Because it was really interesting. The evidence out of China showed that it was families that were having these big clusters. California is a different place, but I think their big concern is clusters of cases within families. And once again, it's not kids who are getting sick. It's not the young people. The epidemiology on this is really different than the 1918 flu, where you had a whole lot of young people die. These are the elders and the people with other. So anxiety, of course, is that young people and kids are infected and could, within a family, like the kids go out. Frankly, that's why they close the schools and why they close daycares, is they didn't want the kids going out, being in big groups, coming home, being cared for by their grandparents, and then inadvertently and tragically sickening their grandparents. I touched on this briefly. If in fact there are other respiratory illnesses going around right now, so it could very well, if you haven't had a flu shot, you could have the flu, you could have a cold. If it is suspicious for COVID, and it looks like that you just have a mild case, as I said earlier, it's a 14-day quarantine, so pretty long time. Should we report to our medical provider for symptomatic? Absolutely, absolutely. So you may have heard early on, and frankly, this was a bit of a problem in this gets to the whole issue of not having enough tests, but Centers for Disease Control early on had very narrow criteria for who could get a test. Initially, they were just saying you had to, in this extremely high-risk group, or you had to travel to China. It's broader now, and what the CDC is basically saying is, let your provider decide. This is up to your provider. So absolutely talk to your doctor, and that's really that is your provider is the gatekeeper for all of this. It's the provider who's going to get you a test. It's the provider who's going to recommend what you do. It's the provider who's going to be monitoring your symptoms. It's going to be done from a distance like this, telemedicine, because the doctors themselves need to stay healthy. So they will tell you not to come in. So you don't want to, worst thing you want to do is drive into your doctor's office sit in a crowded waiting room, expose others, or you be exposed, and create more problems. Question from Susan, what can we do to be more prepared next time? Question, I would love to circle back to that. We're learning a huge amount in terms of stockpiling inventory. There is a federal inventory, not quite sure why it hasn't fully been opened up yet. We've been promised. Newsom said there are supplies. If you see the National Guard out and about, it's federal supplies are beginning to come. Newsom has gotten 1 shipment out of 4 so far, but on their way. Good question for Matt. Let me just motor through some of mine, Matt, and we can turn it off to you. Volunteers are making masks. Is there an organization locally collecting them? These are all questions I can answer with just a little bit of research. So indulge me with that. A question from Diane. The TSA worry reminds me of the worry about grocery workers and all of us. Excellent point, Diane, absolutely. These are folks who, these poor clerks are exposed to everyone. I actually talked to someone at the California Department of Public Health, and they haven't gone too public with this yet, but they're also concerned about those little machines, what are they called? The ones that you slide your credit cards through, because there is evidence the virus lives on surfaces for several hours, if not longer, and our hands are all over those machines, Let's see.
What would be the option there, Lisa? If you're going to the store, not to use your credit card, I guess.
Presumably, or gloves, or sanitizer, right? Easier said than done, but frankly, I've been covering my hands in sanitizer, which is great, works really well. Before using the machine, slide the card through, and then clean my hands immediately afterward. And then, of course, don't put them near your face. I mean, a virus, here's my hand. A virus isn't going to hurt my hands at all. What hurts is if the virus is around your respiratory passages. So all this thing about don't touch your face, easier said than done. But that's why.
And Rebecca's saying Apple or Google Pay. Use your phone to pay.
Yeah.
If you're doing that. Some of us are dinosaurs.
Right.
What might be?
Yeah, we're all going to be so smart by the time this is over. Oh my gosh. Again, just a reminder that this is just for a while, right? So the whole goal, when they talk about bending the curve, as you know, I would encourage anyone to get on our California Department of Health website that shows you how many cases we have, or the Johns Hopkins has an amazing link. Number of cases in the U.S., the curve we're seeing is not good. It's sort of Italy looking. So if we can bend that curve, then, whatever, 8 weeks, this will all be over with. We'll all be popping champagne and talking about what a wild ride it was.
Let's hope.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. Stay strong, right?
Mm.
How does our reaction compare to China? And can that be used to predict how soon our local caseload will level off? I'm going to actually look at some notes here I made about China that was remarkable. In the immediate area around Wuhan and the Hubei province, they had lockdown like ours, only stricter, for 1.4 billion people on lockdown. They had this lockdown home isolation, I think it was just 10 days, and that alone made a difference because everyone was complying. They had 50 to 60 million people on quarantine. That's like quarantine that if you stepped outside, it's like a $10,000 fine. I mean, serious.
Mm.
As you all probably heard the wonderful stories about their hospitals. They built 3 new hospitals in 10 days to a couple weeks. They had 16 temporary medical treatment facilities up almost immediately. And they also had these things called fever clinics where you could just go in, get your temperature taken and tested and move on. We could talk about the differences in our response. They were on this right away. And then something else that was really interesting. I interviewed Dr. Cody yesterday. I asked her, for our 200 cases in Santa Clara County, are you now doing contact tracing to figure out, where are these cases? Are they evenly distributed? Are they clustered or whatever? And she said, we don't have the manpower. There's absolutely no way we can do contact tracing for every single one of our cases. And by that, as you know, it's basically interviewing someone about where have they been, who have they seen. They're very labor intensive. Last night I learned China brought in 1,500 epidemiologists, and they had 5 people every one case doing contact tracing and tracking this. So they really mobilized time. Certainly with a governance structure like China's, you have the ability to do that instead of a democracy where in San Francisco people go out into the parks and are popping beers. Anyway, they were on it. Singapore was also on it. Taiwan was also on it. Iran, it was almost a perfect storm. It was in the middle of a religious holiday where there were a lot of Chinese Muslims who'd come. And there was a lot of, even though it's a dictatorship, it was pretty ineffective in turning it around quickly. Right, let's see here. Go through some of these. Question from Rebecca. What are your thoughts about the big Florida spring breaks we saw happening on the news this week? Spread of the virus. Really bad idea. Really bad idea. Forgive me, I haven't been watching TV news. I assume maybe in Florida it's business as usual. Florida's got a problem because of its elderly population. Those of you who know and love Italy know that that's a similar problem there. The average 18-year-old has no business being down there having fun and gathering. What advice do you have for essential workers like those working with homeless communities? A question from Katie, really good question. Santa Clara County is doing tremendous work and wanting to get people inside. It means exposure to lots of people, lots of hand washing. Frankly, Katie, the more you can do to protect yourself, better. Our concern is with shelter in place is that if you don't have a shelter, that's not an option. So it's a really, really vulnerable population. And I know there's a huge amount of concern about what will happen to them. What will happen to them. I don't know. A question from Rebecca. My concern are the young people returning to their homes along the eastern seaboard and bringing the virus with them. That's absolutely the case. I talked to my 93-year-old great aunt today, and the East Coast is watching us and is really worried. So Governor Cuomo in New York has jumped into place. New Orleans, I think, is having a harder time. Jay Inslee in Washington's doing a fabulous job to the extent he can. This really got ahead of him. I mean, the problem with not having tests is that we had no idea of what was going on in the general population. So we didn't know fully what was going on until people started dying. Once people start dying, because of the delay, you've got a whole bunch of people infected. So both for Governor Newsom and Governor Inslee, this got out from under them. Folks back east have the benefit of watching what's happened here. You all probably are familiar with what happened. I think it was New Rochelle, of an Orthodox Jewish community, and they circled the wagons and they had a complete containment area. So they were aggressive. It's really different doing shelter in place if you're in the South Bronx than if you're in California in your backyard. So it's, the point that the state keeps making and the CDC keeps making is it's not one size fits all, that solutions that work for Santa Clara County and New Rochelle are going to be different than what works for Lassen County or Alpine or Placer or Sioux Falls or North Dakota. If you're in a rural community, which isn't to say that those rural communities won't be affected. If it does become established, they don't have access to UCSF, Stanford, and Valley Med. So it's really in their best interest to take steps now. Hard to resist stockpiling basic supplies, panic buying. How worried should we be about the supply chain and things like toilet paper becoming completely unavailable? I am totally befuddled by all this. Our toilet paper comes from, correct me if I'm wrong, like the Pacific Northwest, right? Like not coming from China, I don't think. I don't know. So why, like, how did that happen? We asked Dr. Messonnier at CDC very early on when we first started seeing this rush. It's like, should we be worried about this? And she said the only people who should be stocking up are the people who are above the age of 65 or at medically high risk. Because if you're over 65 and medically high risk, you don't want to be roaming the aisles of CVS or Walgreens if you're not feeling well, or if, you just don't want to be there, period. So those are the folks who need the toilet paper. Those are the folks that need the supplies. It's not everyone else. And it's a little horrifying that that message has not gotten through. I do think it, and this gets to the issue of preparation, it says something about our supply chain. As those of you know, I'm sure, in business and retail, we've got this whole just-in-time supply chain, which means inventories tend to be low, and it's a really tight supplies, and it saves money and all that. What it lacks is the resiliency and the flexibility and the ability to scale up if you suddenly need to. I had hoped that all this would get better. Leanne says she was in CVS today and everyone was looking for toilet paper. It's like pretty unbelievable. I don't even get it. I mean, it's not a diarrheal disease, so whatever. I mean, my hope is at some point everyone will like have all of everything they need and then just run out of room. Rebecca Barbee says Mayor Cantrell, New Orleans is alive and vocal. I would love to hear maybe Matt at our earliest chance, because it's already I've been blabbing for 35 minutes, to hear what other people have heard and other people's experience. Leanne said paper towels are selling a lot of those too. Early reports that Diane says that people needed to buy water, food, and toilet paper. Why on earth do we need to buy water? I mean, our water comes from Yosemite. I mean, that's where our water, like Hetch Hetchy, it wasn't getting better than that. Food and toilet paper, again, if you're over 65 and you don't want to be shopping, makes sense to stockpile, but everyone else, of course, frankly, things have changed because now we are more restricted in our movements. But anyway, I think that was anxiety speaking and not common sense.
Yeah. If anybody has a question and,
Yeah.
you're unable to use your chat, you can make your video live and wave your hand, and I can call on people so we don't have people talking at the same time.
So great to see all your faces.
And names.
And names.
There was something, I think Rebecca Barbee said something about making masks. I haven't seen anything about that, but if it's, and we did hear from a family member that the physicians at Menlo Medical Clinic, Palo Alto Clinic, were, running out and trying to make their own protective gear.
And Katie just posted that she has a friend who's doing it.
Okay.
Katie, do you want to talk about that?
So if there's resources, we could let people know and how to do it and what to do with homemade stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know, but Marius is actually a mutual friend of ours. But I know that the agency I work for is looking for masks. We're not medical personnel, but we're out in the field working with clients. So I put a post on Facebook and mentioned something, and then she private messaged me and said, "Hey, a sewers group of mine is involved in making masks." So, I guess she's doing it. I can certainly ask her who she's doing it with or what the parameters are if you'd like, and circulate.
Yeah.
It's one different mask, but it's
I wanted to ask,
go ahead, Sunny.
is this going to be available to send to other people?
This
or
recording?
Is this live? Yeah.
This recording? We're hoping so. I inadvertently started the recording like 20 minutes early. So the question is, can we edit out? I was fixing my hair and so forth. So. No, yeah, we want to, if it's okay with Lisa, we want to make this available. So
Absolutely. And Rebecca just posted something saying there's a story in Forbes that offers detail about how can you help with the masks?
Oh, and there's Joanne Fabrics has mass instructions and a
Great
site here. So So we'll, if anybody else has resources, I hear some, yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Jim has a question. We've read it's okay to get take out and have support local restaurants. My understanding is it's absolutely fine, and Lord knows they need support, so it's absolutely.
To get food from local restaurants?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. See if there are any other questions. Leanne asked, confused about what's considered an essential business. Leanne, I can post the link to that. The governor's office posted a link. You know, in general, it's great. Well, I won't. It's a fairly long list, and it's a controversial list, as you can imagine. The cannabis industry is really upset because they're being shut down. But yeah, we can post that as well.
No doubt that's causing higher anxiety for some people.
Oh, you should have seen the lines. The night before the shutdown, they were like around the block.
Hopefully they were longer than,
down in San Jose.
I'm hoping they were longer there than at the gun shop. That's all I have to say.
Hey, I'm raising my hand. It's Rebecca. Can I?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Okay. You know me. I'll be assertive.
Just people individually unmute their microphones and go ahead.
Yeah. So just a little piece of information about ordering foods from restaurants. A friend of mine who's a chef in San Francisco had a really lovely point that she shared on her Facebook page, was that, yes, please support your local, not your major chains, but your local restaurants if you can make that choice. And in particular, if you have the ability to go and pick up from them and not use DoorDash or Grubhub, they get more money. So if you go there, they don't have to pay any of those fees. But if you can't, if you're immune compromised or you can't get out, it doesn't work for you, using a delivery service is wonderful as well. So that's my friend Rachel, who's a chef. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, Rebecca,
And makes the point in the chat. If you can phone in your order from the car, and they take your credit card information by phone and deliver it to your trunk. So how great is that?
yeah, and Diane was just saying they did that at the nursery today. So
I got it. Okay, I'm sorry.
So Rebecca was reminding me that you can actually use a hand icon to raise your hand. So Rebecca has disappeared. I have all the pictures on a grid, so that's helpful. Thanks. Anybody else have a question or a comment or a request? Speak up. Okay.
Oh, I have one. I've seen a lot of charts about, how long it takes for people to get the disease, what the contamination rates are, yada, yada. But I haven't seen a lot of recovery charts. I haven't seen a lot of, how long does it take for someone to recover? What are those recovery times? What's the population? What are the clusters around that? Would love some information there.
Great question, and I haven't seen any either. It certainly hasn't been published in the journals yet. It's still pretty early on for disease that, can 2 to 3 weeks and much longer. The woman who just died in Santa Clara down at Valley Med 2 days ago, she was hospitalized at the end of February, I think, and has been in intensive care all this time. In terms of the recovery of the mild and moderates, people, I talked to a man in Redwood City who never really was symptomatic and just carried on with his life and was fine. So I think it probably depends on the extent of your illness. So the reason, to answer your question, I think there are a lot of people who are really interested in that and really want to know, are asking the same thing. A lot of the medical studies we've seen thus far that look at the natural history of the disease and the clinical course of the disease are out of China, and our medical infrastructure is different, and we may see things, that may not be representative. So the virus does have this affinity for the epithelial cells in the respiratory tract, and there are reports about enduring respiratory problems even after recovery. These are for people with more severe disease. But I don't want to go any farther than that because I don't think people really know. I mean, you think about what's involved in a study like that, it's extraordinary and it's essential, right? Because we actually want to know what happens here. But, giant trial where you're collecting data on everyone who's hospitalized coming in, what symptoms do they present with, how do they progress, what's their treatment, when they come out the other end, what shape are they in, and how are they? Really, really, really important study, but it's not there yet.
Lisa?
To, forgive me, just before I forget, the only drug the drug that holds the most promise right now, where there's the most excitement, I'm sure you've heard of it, it's called Redemsivir. It's out of Gilead, which is Dan Clendenin's daughter works there. Stanford, now like 8 clinical trials going on with like 300 people per trial, all at different phases of illness, and trying different dosage levels, offering it at different points in their illness. So huge deployment of our whole clinical trial system, where people being pulled off of other trials and focusing on this. And if it works, it's a game changer. If you think about it, if you could just give an antiviral and get people through and they can go home, it changes absolutely everything.
Yeah. I think Gail has a question.
I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
Just the John Hopkins one. We've been refreshing that chart. It's just frightening, right? The way it's elevated now. But it does have a recovered section there, but I don't know, what that even relates to, right? But next to the number of deaths, it says recovered. So hopefully that will keep getting higher.
Right.
The other thing is, we just wanted to say, we are trying to use local businesses and restaurants. We're really worried. We live near California Avenue, and it's a ghost town there. There's a few restaurants that are remaining open, and we know several of the owners, and they're really scared too. So to the extent people feel comfortable doing that, we just walked over there and picked our stuff up, and they're very, very careful. And I think that is the best way if you have that option. But, we may not have these businesses when we get through this. So to the extent you can do it, we're trying to spread the word.
Yeah, there's so many people. Because business is stopping and people are not moving and making plans, and it's really affecting a lot of people, including our, parishioners in terms of, economics. So
Yeah.
we need to pray about that and do everything we can to keep this virus from spreading.
Leanne asked a good question. How long do you think the shelter in place is going to last? Anyone who watched the governor's press conference 2 days ago, you'll hear that question, and which he successfully dodged, and he dodged it for a reason. And my guess is it's because he's waiting to see what the numbers look like. So he's not saying, and I don't think he knows. I think, if we begin to see if we see that curve bending, if this works, my guess is over time they'll start loosening them a little bit at a time. It's not going to be an overnight, everyone can go on with business as usual. My guess is it'll be incremental. It's going to be a while. What we're assuming is 8 weeks. I don't know why we've latched onto that number. What was I going to say about that? Oh no, the reason.
That's as far as our imagination can go, I think. Again,
Well said.
it's a hopeful estimate. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My thought is, if you put yourself in the governor's position or the California Department of Public Health's position, it takes several days after an exposure to actually start to develop symptoms, and you're not doing that baseline. You actually don't know how prevalent it is out in the larger community because you're only testing people who are really, really sick. So if you're the one who's trying to watch these numbers to see what's happening, you're going to want to give it time, right? So it will take time. It'll take a couple weeks before you actually see what we're doing today play out in real lives on the ground. So this speaks to the importance of all of us. You know, Matt, you've been such an inspiration of like, how do we create models and video chats and all this that work, knowing that it'll be a while. It'll be a while.
And Mary has asked Gail if she can share that link. I think the John Hopkins link. Gail or Jim, I don't know if you can do that during this thing, but you can send it to me and I can send it to Mary. Yeah.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I might have to do it after, but we'll get it.
Okay. Any other questions for Lisa in terms of the dynamics of the virus?
Our chat, 8 weeks was the period for the federal restrictions on groups of 50 or more people. Yeah, we'll see, right?
Yeah.
I think it's meaningful that universities are saying and the schools are saying don't plan to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
mean, yeah. I mean, it's easier to say this is over. Let's commence everything than continuing cancellations. So
yeah, and Matt and everyone, I have to tell you, I think the concern on the state level is that people will start to get frustrated and non-compliant and will say, what are we doing this for? And lose commitment. And then we'll be right back where we were at the beginning of this, or worse. So again, if the more successful we are in supporting each other and keeping heart, the better this whole thing will turn out.
So if anybody finds resources of ways we can help as a community, please send them to me and Nikki, and we'll try to find ways to encourage people to respond, like making masks. That would be great. If there's various resources out there, if you could send them, we can try to figure out what would be best, or just share them with everybody.
I have a thought, Matt.
Yeah.
Rebecca. So one of the things that St. Mark's has begun to do, I think very well, is to translate our programming into Zoom-based models. But what we haven't done so far until this moment has to have a place where we really could talk to each other. And so I've been wondering this week, and like last night, my improv community in San Francisco did an online improvisational show that was fantastic. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to help the current small groups translate onto Zoom, if there's a way to create small groups on Zoom. I have time and am totally willing to help with that.
Great.
But I think that this is what we don't have yet, is have the ability to talk to each other together and to ask questions. That's not necessarily like the details about the virus, but I care about you as a person. How are you doing?
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So we had a great adult education meeting last week on Zoom, and we're brainstorming a lot of this. How can we help people? How can we come up with programs that are helpful, meaningful, supportive, encouraging, educational? So we're going to continue to work on that. If any of you have ideas about that, please do let us know and share that just with an email. And different people are going to have different speeds to be able to use technology. So to hear Rebecca say I can help with that is a great thing. So good stuff.
We just posted the John Hopkins, the website.
Great. Thank you. See that? Gail said she couldn't do it now, and there it is.
Wow.
Jim did it.
I know. It's teamwork. It's teamwork.
That's it.
It's teamwork. We need each other. We need to be with each other as we're alone, right? I heard a song on the radio today, "Alone and All Together." I was trying to capture that thing. how do we continue to connect? So yeah, if you have more ideas, we're trying to do that. We're also, we've instituted our calling. You know, the parish is divided up with leaders calling the vestry and various leaders. We call like 3 times a year just to connect and engage around the picnic or stewardship or what have you. But we've just sent that out. We've updated it and given a script to people to call everyone in the parish. Nikki and I are calling parishioners, starting with the most elderly that we might not have seen or connected with. And so if you know of people that are alone or compromised in any way, please reach out and let us know if there's anything we can do.
I'd like to point out Morris's eloquent point that humans are notoriously poor at understanding exponential growth. So predicting the end depends very much on what happens in the middle. We are at the beginning.
Yeah, and Leanne's reiterating this, you know, if you know people, think to yourself, if you know somebody who is without support, without family, without, you know, is by themselves most of the time, just a phone call makes a huge difference. So, okay. So tomorrow, Anna's asking about, so tomorrow, live stream at 10 o'clock with morning prayer. Nikki and I will be doing that. And there's a wonderful volunteer tech team that's worked Friday and today. Trying to get that ready and improve it. I pre-recorded the sermon. So out at the fountain in the memorial garden. And we have some pre-recorded music by Jim. You know, Jim is 69 years old, so he's in the vulnerable category, our organist. So, so we're trying to learn as we go, how can we make that a viable connection and to adapt and make things briefer and everything briefer except the sermon. Joke. No, the sermon's down to 12 minutes. So anyway, that's a live stream. You have that information from the Messenger Light. And so I hope you can join us for that. Share that with somebody who might appreciate it, if you think you know somebody who might. So,
Hey, Matt, it's Rebecca. I just put the link in the chat, so Anna has it. She can see the chat.
oh,
The
fantastic.
live stream is there.
It's a YouTube channel. You can always go to YouTube and just find the St. Mark's channel as well. Rebecca Barbee suggested we advertise the labyrinth. You know, people can come over to the church and do a solo walk of the labyrinth. We also sent out, you can do it with your fingers, you know, just on a tabletop. So that went out with the Messenger Light as well. So we just trying to find different ways to connect. So if you have an idea about doing it, you can do your own private Zoom group and reach out to friends that you have and do that. So
you want to mention Whole Foods is offering
Whole Foods is offering, not that we all want to do a lot of grocery shopping, but if you do need things, if you're over 60, you have to show your ID
to get in the first hour.
to get in the first hour at 8 o'clock.
okay.
So I have to say, I'm so moved by the sacrifice that so many people are making for so few, to be honest with you. When you think our entire culture and our society is now sheltering on behalf of the vulnerable. I mean, that's pretty remarkable when you think about it. And that so many people are willing to make this sacrifice just so that the frail and the medically vulnerable and the elders are safe. And I think that's pretty profound.
So
I think that's beautiful also, but I was reading in some of the reports that 40% of the people who become severely ill are younger than 55. It's not just the frail elderly, it could be anyone, and it's just
seems to be more than expected. They're not there's less of them dying, of course, but
Yeah, but still,
getting
Yeah,
sick.
yeah.
So I'm looking at the chat here. Lots of people calling each other. My mother-in-law's calling Martha Bachman, who's 104, every other day just to check in. You know, they were friends before. So obviously a lot of that's going on. And we do, and those calls are important because the elderly they're not using the internet. They're not streaming and so forth. So the call's huge.
Yeah, there's a message from Anna Clay. Speaks to that.
Yeah. Sending cards and notes. Interesting. Yeah. To those who are not. Yeah. So we're concentrating
Anna,
on
I'm happy.
Go ahead.
Anna, I'm happy to walk you through YouTube and Zoom and all of that. So I will privately message you and set up a time where we can do that.
Way to go, Mayor. Woohoo!
Thank you, Mary.
I'm actually happy to do that for anybody who needs that. That's what I do in my normal job anyway, is user experience. So
Interesting. Maybe we could send out. No, we can't. We can't send out the internet message to the elderly to say, "Do you need help?" But the phone call. Well, we've asked people in the phone call scripts, and of course, there's an email script too, because a lot of people don't answer their phones. But we've asked, is there anything we can do to help? So hopefully, people will have true needs that we can respond to and look for people. But you're reminding me that we could, we have tech people here, obviously, in the parish that could help others. So I could just brainstorm a list of people, including Rebecca and Mayor, and send an email out asking, can I, if somebody needs help, can we call on you? So
that answer for me is yes.
Okay, great. Anyone else have
Hey, Matt, just so you know, I've been messaging Leanne directly because it was a sidebar conversation about maybe trying to do something in terms of the women's ministry, having like a small group and so we're going to work on that and see what we can do in terms of an online type of thing. So
good stuff. Yeah, Leanne sent out invitations for the women's Facebook page to 15 to 20 new people and to get on board, who hadn't joined. So, and they're all on board, and there's some really good chatting and connecting going on there. So that's really good to see. Okay, so Mayor, are you gonna, Leanne says there's 100 people on the women's Facebook. Are you gonna email Anna or call her? Or?
Yeah, I privately messaged Anna with a chat with my phone number.
Perfect.
But if you want to call her and give it to her too, might help solve the problem. She might not know how to access a private chat.
Okay, I'll check on that. Great. Anyone else?
I just want to say, Lisa, you're awesome.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Here,
Yay!
Yay!
Yay! So lucky.
Happy to do this again.
Say thank you, Lisa. Yay!
Yay!
Thank you.
Yay! Yay!
Thank you. I love sharing this. It's pretty remarkable that what we're experiencing, and I'm happy to provide an update at any point.
Thank you. And Marius privately chatted with me during this to say he's happy to edit this, so we can get thank you, Marius. So we can get this out, or set it up on. I don't know if you can transfer it to the YouTube station or not, but we'll find out about that. Okay. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, live from Palo Alto. Okay. Love you, our. Oh, I want to end with a prayer. Okay.
Okay. And thank you, Matt.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Let us pray. Holy God, you have made us in your own image and redeemed us in Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away any arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts, any judgment, any fear. Break down the walls that separate us. Help us to regard and respect each other by being careful and safe. Unite us by your grace and your love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your healing purpose here and throughout the world. We pray this in the name of Christ. Amen. Thanks all.